Hi, folks. Welcome back to season two of the Aftermarket Champions podcast. I'm your host, Vivek Joshi, founder and CEO of Entitle. We help equipment manufacturers identify, prioritize, and sell aftermarket and service solutions to their installed base. Insights, our purpose built install based intelligence platform, is used by leading OEMs globally to drive revenue growth and improve customer experience and satisfaction. I'm delighted to be back for another enriching journey into the world of aftermarket excellence. Throughout the season, we'll engage in an insightful discussion with industry leaders, exploring innovative strategies and invaluable insights to propel us forward in the industrial aftermarket sector. So, without further ado, let's embark on this journey together. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Vivek Joshi, your host of the Aftermarket Champions podcast. Today, I'm delighted to welcome a new guest, Jayesh Bafna, who's the Vice President of Aftermarket and Service at Komline. Komline is a company that's based in DC and has operations around the country. And I'm excited to welcome him to this week's edition of the Aftermarket Champions podcast. Welcome, Jayesh.
Thank you, Vivek. Glad to be here.
Well, I always love the fact that the guests on our podcast have such diverse backgrounds, a bunch of different experiences, and how they got to their current roles. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and how you wound up doing what you're doing today.
Yep. So I'll start from the beginning, really. So I'm an engineer by education. So worked for 4 years after my engineering at a company called Accenture. It's a consulting company. I worked as a programmer. My original plan was to work for a year and then do my MBA, but I loved programming so much that I spent 4 years before finally jumping onto my MBA program. Interestingly, even in the pre-MBA Accenture experience, I was building software for a client an insurance client that used it for claims solution. So it was really always aftermarket and services right from day one for me. And I thoroughly enjoyed the building part, so building the claim solution for the client, and really the fact that claims is where the customer truly gets an experience with
Right.
the company, because that's the post sales part. So
The moment of truth, right?
that is the moment of truth. So that somehow got me hooked on to the after service of anything. I did my MBA. I joined Cummins Engines in India in their aftermarket organization. So I was always, I'm still an aftermarketer for life, I guess. So been 15, 16 years now.
Wow.
Exclusively in the aftermarket. So even at Cummins in India, it was a bunch of aftermarket roles, starting with aftermarket strategy, pricing, product management, account management. So I changed roles every couple of years or so while in India. After 6 years, I decided to take up a role here in the US. So Cummins Inc., based out of Columbus, Indiana, had an opportunity available, so I applied, got into it, and then relocated with my family, and then spent 5 years at Cummins again in the aftermarket in the product management group where I ran a big chunk of the aftermarket business. So after that, after running it for about 5 years or so, I decided to switch gears and join Comline. So it was not so much of an intentional move, but more so of a by chance that this opportunity came across. And I thought, hey, why not try something different? So moved from a $34 billion company with 75,000 people to a much smaller organization, about $200 million and about 450 people. So a significantly a different experience from where I was to where I am now. Over the past a little over a year now, I've been a part of Komline Group, acting as their vice president for aftermarket and services. And in fact, I remember we met sometime in April. In fact, it might be just to the date last year at DC.
Almost exactly a year ago this time. Yes.
So I remember that conversation with you, and I also remember that you had told us, "Hey, you guys are not ready yet." So I reflected on it. Denai, our CEO, and I, we reflected on it, and like, yeah, maybe Vic is right. Yeah, we want to just crawl before we walk and run.
Right.
So
Right.
it was good advice, by the way, Vic.
Good. Good. I appreciate it. Sometimes the experience helps, right? But it's an interesting story. So if I do the math, you spent almost 11 years in Cummins, and like you said, Cummins is 34 billion, 75,000 employees. Cummins is also a very diverse company in terms of product, right? We know this for gensets, they make engines, they make a whole bunch of other things. What business were you in, Jayesh?
I was in the aftermarket business supporting various segments. So throughout my career, I supported all sorts of segments. So back in India and even here in the US, so I supported at various stages industrial segments like mining, marine,
Mm-hmm.
oil and gas, and power generation,
Mm-hmm.
and automotive. So
Okay.
my last role at Cummins was where I was leading the small engines, small and medium engines aftermarket business, which
Mm-hmm.
primarily plays in the automotive segment.
Mm-hmm.
But across
Interesting.
these years, I have had experience across all segments.
Now, before I get to the Comline story and aftermarket, Cummins has always been known to be two things, right? One is a very robust aftermarket, well-developed aftermarket and services business. I mean, I know you guys have invested, they have invested tons of money in building this business out. That's point number one. Point number two, they also had a very strong channel partner network in terms of being able to go to market and reach the big customer base that they have. How was that experience working in an indirect channel for you as an aftermarket leader?
Yep. So you're absolutely right in your assessment of the Cummins aftermarket. It's a very, very strong aftermarket business, very robust. Even during times of recession or downturns, the aftermarket business would always hold steady. And it was originally thought that aftermarket business is counter-cyclical, where in good times the aftermarket business would go down, and bad times the aftermarket business would thrive. But what we saw was good times or bad times, aftermarket business was always the
Mm-hmm.
bedrock of not just Cummins top line, but more so of bottom line. It's very
Mm-hmm.
profitable business, and
Right.
uh, a lot of times when you have to get that extra money, aftermarket is where we would get that extra money.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway. So in terms of the importance of the business, I think the organization itself invested a lot to grow the business and provide all the tools and resources
Mm-hmm.
to the business and to people like me to make us successful professionals and help us
Mm-hmm.
run the business successfully. So I think
Right.
from that standpoint, I feel like uh, the investment at Cummins did was significant. It also helped me learn a lot of things over the
Mm-hmm.
past so many years. And then when I joined Comline, I realized how valuable the experience was. So I don't know, when you are in the well, you don't know what's happening,
Right.
but when you jump out the well is when you realize, okay,
Right.
yeah, what you were experiencing. So I think it was really fantastic and memorable experience for me. It helped me grow as an aftermarket professional.
Can I pick on a couple of things? You said something important, right? So Cummins invested not just in the business itself of aftermarket, but the people in that business itself, right? They gave people like you an opportunity to grow pretty quickly as senior leaders. How was that? I mean, tell me a little bit about the culture, because one of my recent guests said to me that it is a mindset, right? In terms of how people think about the aftermarket business. It's not an afterthought, but it really is at the forefront of the business and the connection to the customer. And therefore, putting your best people forward is actually important. It seems to me, at least on the outside looking, and that's how Cummins always thought about it. Is that an accurate, maybe a judgment from the outside?
I think it evolved. So the thought process evolved a lot in the past 11, 12 years while I was there.
Hmm.
It evolved a lot. So I will tell you that when I joined initially, uh, the feeling I had and the feeling a lot of my leadership had there was that the rest of the organization still thought of aftermarket as an afterthought. So that
Mm.
was definitely the feeling, and you know uh, the the general perception that we had when I started. But I know that the leadership back home in India as well as here in the US did a lot of work
Mm.
and a lot of selling, internal selling really
Mm.
across other businesses to showcase the importance of aftermarket. And the other thing with Cummins is that Cummins does encourage a lot of internal movement. So,
Mm.
we as aftermarket organization would export talent to various
Mm.
portions of the business, which really help. So people at junior levels all the way to the vice president levels, we would have aftermarket people going outside of aftermarket and running those businesses. So I think that really helped champion the cause of aftermarket,
Mm.
the business, and also uh, showcased how important we were in terms of establishing the customer experience, uh,
Mm.
and establishing how important we were on the profitability side as well. So
Mm.
I think that the folks who would be listening to the podcast, a lot of them would be aftermarket professionals, and I think all of them realize how important aftermarket is, especially to
Right.
the bottom line of a company. But then
Right.
outside of our aftermarket group, it is a little bit difficult for people to totally comprehend how important and
Mm.
how much a dollar of profit
Impact. Yeah.
impact does the aftermarket business get.
There's two different things you said out there, which is interesting, right? One is the aftermarket group in India and the US. They quote unquote exported people into other functional and other parts of the business in Cummins. So there's a broader appreciation. My guess is there was a reverse as well, right? So people from the product side and other sides were coming into the aftermarket. So there's a good cross pollination of talent. That's point number one. The other thing actually is find interesting, and this is actually something pretty powerful about large companies like Cummins, global companies like Cummins is, you were born and brought up in India, you went to school in India, you started in Cummins India after business school, but they moved you from India to the US into a role with the US territories and stuff. And they basically expect you to come in and perform out here just the way, you should, right? I mean, that's a pretty amazing investment they made in talent as well. You
Yep,
know?
yep. And I will tell you again, maybe I'm repeating myself, but as Cummins did spend a lot of time building these processes in place so that people like me would be plug and play in a different territory without
Correct.
without
Correct.
much of an hassle, really. And
Correct.
and you come from India as well, so I think the advantage that typically folks from India have is the language. So we speak English, we learn in English. So I think that was also another factor that really helped that move
Yeah.
from India to the US. But I definitely credit Cummins a lot into for the fact that they really establish a lot of strong processes, and they also encourage a lot of movement. Not just within the business but within
Across.
geography. So
Right.
it's really people somebody in fact before I was leaving Cummins, I did hire one person from one of our African distributors. It
Mm.
was fully owned by Cummins, but it was he was running the distribution business in one of the countries in Africa. So we imported him from there because of his experience. So I think, and there's so many examples where Cummins would do it very frequently to cross pollinate, and I think it really helps both the organization as well as the people.
Right.
It's a two-way street.
But that I think is actually fascinating, right? Because I also worked many years ago at a large company that routinely moved people across businesses, across regions, across geographies all the time. And we used to almost call it the military life because you almost expected every 2, 3 years to move somewhere else. But it really made you a very flexible and growth oriented leader because you're always thinking, you always have to learn fast. And so, how did that manifest itself when you came to the US? Because you had to learn a completely new territory, completely, yes, it's Cummins process, but a different way of doing business. And how did that make you a better aftermarket, a better leader? Forget aftermarket leader, better leader. I mean, that'll be interesting for me to understand because I've always been fascinated by these companies like Cummins, Citibank, General Electric, and others that routinely move people all over the world, you know?
So I would say I've always been lucky, knock on wood, with my managers and leadership, whether in India or here in the US. So I think when I moved to the US, I knew how the aftermarket processes run, uh, and I knew how the aftermarket business really runs in India. But when
Hmm.
I came to the US, it was me getting charge of all territories. So all
Mm.
195 countries that Cummins plays in, I had responsibilities for the mining and
Business, yeah.
mining and marine and oil and gas businesses when I came here. So I think the my leadership team really helped me a lot in coming up to speed and helping me understand what were the nuances of doing business in the US and also doing business outside of the US. Now,
Hmm.
because I had already had experience in India, in a growing economy, part of it really helped me deal with other similar economies. And when I say
Mm.
similar, not in terms of size, but in terms of,
Yeah.
say, customer price sensitivity, for example, in
Right.
Latin America, yeah, it's much more easy for somebody like me to understand what the
Right.
dynamics were because again, customers are very price sensitive, very scrappy, very innovative in their
Right.
ways, in how they use the engines and how they
Right.
fix the engines and how we sold parts. So I think some of the appreciation, because I was in India, I was able to apply it there. Whereas, when I was dealing with really customers in territories like US or say South Africa, Australia, big mining customers for whom only downtime really mattered. So that was
Mm.
very different. Where I had significantly different leverage on pricing.
Right.
And availability really mattered a lot more than being scrappy or being innovative about this because those guys were like, yeah, when I need a part, I need it within 24
Needed.
hours.
Right.
I want my dump trucks and shovels to be running 24/7, 365. So I think to circle back to your question, it was a lot to do with my leadership here
Hmm.
in the US and the experience that I had from India that helped me quickly grow in a more global business where I was responsible for customers across the entire world. And I'd been all across the world, like all
Yeah.
countries.
That's amazing at a young age to get that experience. But I think there's something you said that I've now heard multiple times from people who I interviewed, which is the people around you matter a lot, both above you as the people you report to and the people below slash around you as a supportive network. The other thing you said, which is actually interesting, and I want to bring that forward to your current job, is effectively what you're really saying is that even though I grew up in the Cummins world and Cummins process, there was no one size fits all because I had to think differently for Latin America versus South Africa versus US versus something else. And the ability for you now to have done that gives you a sense of appreciation for not just different cultures with different business practices, different conditions, and you kind of embed that muscle memory, if you may, right, in terms of how you take it forward, right? So now, fast forward to a new job. I know Cummins is a large publicly traded company. Comline is a privately held, private equity owned company. What is the motivation that they had to go hire somebody like you? What was going on in your CEO's mind, the investor's mind, to say we need to go hire a VP of aftermarket? Because if I remember correctly, there was no such role before,
Yep,
right?
yep, exactly. So I think the motivation behind Denai and so Denai is our CEO, Denai and the investor group to hire somebody from our aftermarket was I think maybe multifold, but one of the most important thing was that they had been in an acquisition spree. So when I entered, I think they had already acquired 6 or 7 companies on the platform company. So Comline Sanderson is the platform company, but
All
they
right.
did end up acquiring 6 or 7 companies. Every business had an aftermarket business inside them, so they needed someone to be able to drive common processes and a common aftermarket related best practices, especially on
Mhm.
pricing and product management across the board. So they needed somebody who could make that happen because you would know that some of or most of these small businesses they are also very in terms of resources there's not a lot of people there. So just a few people do a lot of things, so it's difficult to move people out and help drive
Mhm.
that corporate wide actions, which is why they wanted somebody like me to come in and drive
Mhm.
these corporation wide
Outcomes, yeah.
initiatives.
Yeah.
So
So, just for listeners, if you don't mind, maybe you can explain in 30 seconds or a minute, what does Comline do? What kind of markets is it? What kind of products does it build? What markets do you sell into? It'll be great to just kind of get a quick
yep.
snapshot of that.
Comline is majorly uh, it's a private equity owned company, but it's majorly involved in providing equipment for separation. So whether it's a solid liquid separation, liquid separation, solid gas separation, etc. So if you think about municipal waste, so that's a good example of a solid liquid separation. We have municipal as a big segment. We have agriculture also as a very big segment. So
Mm,
if you think about corn, corn wet milling, so you separate
mm,
the protein, starch, fiber from the corn, so you are able to extract those using Comline equipment.
mm,
We also have a unit that supports RO or manufactures and deploys RO or reverse osmosis
mm.
equipment. So that's like on the cleaner side of or
Right,
cleaning the water side of things.
right.
We have stormwater as well. So one of our businesses operates in a stormwater side of things. And
Mm,
then one business operates in the food and beverage side for
mm,
doing this installations. So, for example, if you think about Coca-Cola or Dasani, all the Coke brands, where our business goes and installs piping for those. So
mm, mm.
it's a lot to do with some of these segments, usually solid liquid and liquid solid gas separation, but also some of these related
Infrastructure behind it.
businesses. So
Right.
when we are looking at when Dana is looking at businesses, I think there's always some commonality of customers and some sort
Right.
of adjacency that comes with the next business, with the current
Right.
business.
So it's interesting. So you said, first of all, thank you for that. That is a good background for that. So when you think about the aftermarket, like you said, six divisions, six acquisitions, they all had aftermarket in there, right? So the question is, how do you then take that and make it into one? Well, I mean, the last year you spent in really not just coming up to speed, but really organizing the putting the team together, the practices, the processes. What have those priorities been for you?
So one of the things that I started working on immediately was pricing. So I think one of the things that we wanted to do was to have the right pricing processes in place so that we have annual pricing actions. We are able to do inflation adjustments year on year and have the same common process across all the businesses. So you have end of December or 1st of Jan pricing action. So you communicate with your customers that this will be a new price list. So that's something that not all businesses were doing it as frequently or as methodically as some of the businesses were doing. So my job was to have the same processes established across the board, plus bring in my insights from Cummins as to what would be some best practices on the pricing side. Then also on the services side, I think we had some differences between businesses charging different rates to different kind of customers. So some businesses were doing it better than the others. So how do you bring those best practices from one of the business and spread it across the board? Same thing with product. So some businesses are much better at doing the right kit for their machine. So how do you get those processes out of that business and also deploy it across the other businesses? And at the same time, all of these were experiences that I had back at Cummins. So it wasn't new in terms of the processes themselves, but I think operating in a much smaller environment, which a lot less resources, a lot less people, was the challenge, but the real fun part of it.
You know, it's fascinating. There's a whole host of harmonization stuff you did, right? So you're making sure that you're not only bringing in best practices from outside, not just Cummins, but there's just general best practices from outside. But even within the 6 divisions, you found different practices and trying to make them the same.
Yep.
To kind of create a homogeneous organization to some degree, not completely homogeneous, but somewhat homogeneous. Now, when I think about the challenges of going from a behemoth like a Cummins to a little nimble minnow like a Comline, what are the big differences you found besides the fact that huge amount of resources, very light resources? What was a big thing you found in terms of establishing an aftermarket and service business there?
I think coming in a smaller business, I did have some expectation, or I would say, uh, did not have expectations around structure or around processes. And people generally try to do things in the way that they think is most efficient. And usually, what happens is people are doing the same job for a very long time.
Right.
So I think there is a lot of expertise with each of the people that I deal with, but then at the same time, they may not be abreast with the latest happenings in the aftermarket or latest tools and processes that are now available that were not available, say, 20 years back. So I think that was one of the biggest things that the teams, again, various businesses were at various maturity levels, but some of them were far more mature in terms of using these new processes and techniques and so forth, and others were still on, say, paper pen way of doing business. So that was one thing where at Cummins it was like everything was well defined. You had to run, just run. Here it was the exciting piece was you also get to set how things should work and how what should be the path for each of these, and then make sure that your people are able to adapt to the new way of doing things. So I think a lot of structure versus complete lack of structure and trying to bring that structure, which for me it was super exciting. So I know that a lot of people may not like this complete lack of, and I wouldn't say complete, but general lack of structure or general, resource crunch, if you may.
Crunch, yeah.
But I think I enjoy it a lot and I thrive it. And again, it also goes back to, folks from India. And again, I guess you can relate to it. I mean, and you probably lived in Mumbai, right? You grew up in Mumbai. So did I. I mean, you only get limited space. You only have limited time. You only have limited water supply. Everything is limited. So you do learn to work with limited resources. So it feels like home field when you're like, okay, yeah, we're back to where we were. So I think that is a place that I really enjoy. It's definitely different from Cummins where all the resources are available to you. But here, limited resources, but then you have a lot of flexibility to make changes and you have a lot of latitude of doing things.
Right. No, it's amazing what you said is the constrained economy in some ways kind of creates innovation there, right? Now, also, one difference is public company versus private equity owned company. And we all know private equity is probably as singularly focused in driving results as any. Does that have a bearing on what your CEO and your board expect from you in terms of results and velocity of decisions and velocity of performance and stuff like that? How does that play itself out?
So I've only worked at two really big companies and then one small company. The big companies have been publicly owned, and the one small company or mid-sized company is privately owned. So I don't know if it is a factor of the size of the company itself or the ownership, but I wouldn't say that there is a lot of in terms of the way company operates. I don't think it would be any different or much different if it was publicly owned versus privately owned. I think a lot of it is just a function of how just the size of the company.
Right.
Now, definitely, the CEOs and the board's expectation would be that we run quickly. But then this is also why I joined it, because I wanted to run quickly. I wanted to do things quickly. So I think from that standpoint, their expectation and my expectations match quite a bit. So I don't know if that is really a product of being in a private equity or just being a part of a group that wants to run businesses more efficiently.
Right.
I am focused, and my CEO Denai and the investors, they all care a lot and focus a lot about customers. I think financials
Right.
are definitely important, but I always hear them also talk about customers a lot. So,
Yep.
don't screw up your customers, or yeah, don't make your customers angry. So, that's a common theme that I hear from the leadership here as well. So I don't know
Right.
that it's anything different than what you would get in a bigger company. So
Got it. So now, when you think about these experiences you've had now, only a year at Comline, 11 years plus at Cummins, but commonalities, lots of aftermarket experience. Probably I'd say a dozen years. It's probably a dozen years in many ways. Is many years more than many people that we know. But, what is if you step back for a second and say, if I were to ask you, Jayesh, what separates what I would say aftermarket champions from the rest? What would you tell the listeners, tell the people who will listen to this podcast, or so, here are the two or three things that stand out in your mind, just in general experience, right? Not particularly Accenture
yep,
versus Comline versus, but you've seen enough now
yep,
to kind of form an opinion.
yep. So I think the biggest thing I would say is that customer experience and customer loyalty are really, really, really built in the aftermarket. It does not happen during the equipment sale. So, of course, you have to have a solid equipment. You have to sell a great engine for a customer to love it. But then at the same time, you sell it within 3 months or 6 months, but then they
Right.
run it for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So that's the play where aftermarket comes in. So, uh, over these years, what I've realized is aftermarket is where customer experiences are built, customer loyalty is built, and that's where repeat customers are built.
Right.
So
Right.
I think that's one of the biggest things. The other thing also is, again, our, I would say, gang of aftermarket people, we know that profitability is driven from aftermarket. Top
Mm-hmm.
line is driven from the equipment side or
Mm-hmm.
capital side of the business, but really profitability is driven from aftermarket.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I've seen, whether it's Cummins or whether it's Comline. That's true across the board, and even
Right.
at other companies. I have friends in a lot of other organizations that operate in the aftermarket, and that's again another common theme that I always see. That's a profitable place where you build profitability, but that's also the place where you build loyalty
You're right.
with the
Right.
customers. And I
Right.
think the last thing I would say is you you get to experience the entire life cycle of your equipment alongside with the customers when you are in the aftermarket. Usually, the equipment guys would sell the new equipment, and usually their interaction dwindles significantly after that. But you are really living with the customer for a long, long time, and it's not just one person, but as a
Yeah.
group,
Yeah.
you
Absolutely.
are living that experience with the customer. What happens at year 0, year 10, year 20, year 30? I'll tell you one of my team, one of my guys at PPAC in New Jersey. I think he spent like 44 years in the
In the
company,
business. Wow.
and then the other day he was describing to me that an equipment or parts request came to him for an equipment that was even older than him, and he's nearing 68, 69 years old. So you're telling me, hey, this guy is older than I am. So it was
That's
amazing,
right.
just to see how much or what is the latitude of experiences and customer experiences that you get to experience when you are in the aftermarket. So I think just living through the entire life
Yeah.
cycle of your equipment and with your customer.
It's actually something interesting you said that I actually taken away from many people, right? Many of our guests have said the same thing, which is, there's very few places in a company that have the depth and breadth of relationship, really depth of relationship with the customers that aftermarket people do. It's the continuity experiences and making sure the experience is consistent and solid all the way through the life cycle is really important. And the profitability kind of comes as a result of some of the stuff you do. But it's actually a common theme across most of the people that separate the good companies from the bad, which is they pay attention to these experiences. They pay attention to the life cycle or lifetime and life cycle value you deliver to the customer, right? And that's something to keep in mind.
Yep.
You know, um, you've had such amazing experiences in aftermarket and service in the last dozen, 15 years now. As you look back across the things that you've done so far, right? I love listening to podcasts like you do. Yeah, I always ask this question from that my favorite podcaster, Guy Raz, asks his guests, right? If you look at your career of the last 15 years plus 15, 20 years, Jayesh, how much of your success, because you've achieved some pretty good success so far, how much of it do you ascribe to luck? And how much of it is just because you're just, you know, smart and, better talented than most of the people there, right? What's your take on things there?
Uh, by the way, I love Guy Raz as well. I mean, I listen to all his podcasts. Like, yeah, he is amazing.
Yeah.
And I kind of knew this question was coming because I know you like Guy Raz as well.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you. I think it's. I don't have a percentage, but I would say I've been luckier than talented. That's something I would tell you. It's whether it was at Cummins in India or whether it was Cummins here in the US and then to Comline. I feel like I was in the right place at the right time a lot of times. So that helped me get into to the opportunities that I got a chance to. So I think a lot of it was definitely just being there
Yeah.
at the right place at the right time, and I've had really good mentors and good leaders all over all across my career, whether it was back in Accenture or at Cummins and even at Comline now. I've always had really good mentors and a
Mhm.
really good set of people that I worked with. So my network has always really helped
Right.
me connect to various opportunities over time.
Right.
And then the one thing I would say though is that I love learning, so I do like to learn new things. I do like to get into the depth of things. I do get very well attached to my work, and it's a very positive attachment. I love what
Right.
I do, and so far it has happened that I've really loved what I have done. So that also helps me perform,
Succeed. Yeah.
more, go that extra mile in everything I do. So I think
Right.
that also plays a role. But I would say yes, I've been fortunate. I've been in touch with a lot of really smart people and really people who really trusted in me for so many years, and that's what's helped me grow in as well, growing in my career. So.
That's actually amazing because that's what I hear again. More people than not ascribe being in the right place at the right time, being surrounded by people who give you the chance to go succeed, and then your innate drive that makes you different and take advantage of being in the right place at the right time. So that's really good. It's so good to hear. So, Jayesh, I really appreciate this discussion. It's been fascinating. Again, I think you're one of the first people I've talked to who had such diverse size-wise experiences in terms of companies global from India to here, and so it's actually great to kind of get your perspective on it. And it's been fun conversation. So thank you for being a guest today. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Vic. I had a great time, as always, chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thank you. As we complete another enlightening episode, I extend my sincere gratitude to our esteemed guests and you, our valued listeners. If today's conversation resonated with you, please subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Play, or simply visit our website at www.entitled.com for more enriching content. Remember, the pursuit of aftermarket excellence is an ongoing journey, and I look forward to continuing with you. Until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and continue championing aftermarket success.